I want to tell you about a wall, specifically the east-facing wall of Trauma Bay 2 at Brannock Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts. It is a cream-painted wall. The paint is the specific institutional off-white that hospital walls are painted when someone has made the decision that white is too stark and beige is too warm, and off-white is the compromise that offends nobody and pleases nobody and serves the purpose of being a wall that a room needs without the wall having any particular character of its own. The wall has a scuff, a long one, running almost 4 feet at approximately shoulder height for an average adult. Gray-brown on the cream, the accumulated mark of 20 years of gurneys clipping the wall at that exact point, because the bay door requires a specific turning radius that the gurney width barely accommodates, and that, when the turn is made fast, because fast is what the bay requires, the gurney clips the wall. It has clipped it thousands of times. The scuff is the record of those thousands of times. Nobody has repainted the wall. Taking Trauma Bay 2 out of rotation to repaint a wall is a decision that requires administrative approval that nobody on the overnight team has had the energy to pursue, and that the administration has interpreted as a request that can be deferred indefinitely, because the wall functions as a wall regardless of the cosmetic state of its surface, and patient care is not affected by the scuff, and there are approximately 10,000 other things requiring administrative attention before a scuff on a wall in a Trauma Bay. So the scuff is there. Has been there for 20 years, and inside the scuff, if you know to look for them, are marks that have been there for 4 years. Parallel, horizontal, approximately finger width apart. Spaced in the specific, consistent pattern of hands pressed flat against a surface and dragged along it, not scratched, not dug in, but pressed. The mark of a palm on a flat surface, fingers extended, moving along the wall with the slow, deliberate quality of someone who is doing this intentionally and who has done it before. I have been looking at those marks for 3 years. I have been thinking about them for 3 years. I have not asked about them for 3 years. This is the story of what they mean, and why I did not ask, and what happened when the answer arrived without me asking for it. The answer arrived on the night of November 14th. It arrived in the form of a SEAL team and a dying man, and a woman who knew something that nobody on my trauma team had any reason to know. And in the form of a 3-year question, finally getting its answer, which was not the answer I expected, which was larger. Before this story breaks your heart and rebuilds it again, please subscribe to this channel, ring that bell, and drop a comment below telling me which town or city you're listening from tonight. I read every single one. My name is Frank Reilly. I have been a trauma attending at Brannock Medical Center in Boston for 11 years. Boston trauma medicine has a specific character that is different from the trauma medicine of other cities I have worked in, and I have worked in 3 others before landing here. Part of it is the density. Boston is a city that packs a great deal of human activity and human incident into a relatively small geographic footprint, which means the catchment area for a level 1 trauma center in Boston produces a volume and a variety of cases that a comparably sized center in a less dense city does not see. Part of it is the proximity to the water, the harbor, the Charles, the river systems that run through the metropolitan area, which produce their own specific category of trauma. And part of it is the winter, which in Boston is not merely a season but a condition, a sustained low-temperature reality that compounds every other injury category, and that adds the specific physiological challenge of hypothermia to cases that in other climates would present without it. I came to Brannock because it was the best level 1 trauma center in New England, and because best is what I had been chasing since I started in emergency medicine and have not stopped chasing since. I have been chasing it for 11 years, in this building, and I have found it in a number of places. The place I found it most consistently, for 4 of those 11 years, was on the overnight team that Mara Voss charged. I want to be precise about this. Mara Voss did not make the overnight trauma team at Brannock extraordinary. The team was already good when she arrived. It had been built over years by the people who had been on it before her, and by the culture that builds when a team is given the right cases in the right volume, under the right leadership. The team was good. Mara made it the best team I have worked with in 11 years. She did this through presence primarily, not through any single intervention or innovation or structural change. Through the specific, sustained quality of a person who is fully present for the work, who brings everything available to every case, who does not coast on the easy nights and reserves herself for the hard ones, who treats the routine case with the same level of attention as the impossible one, because in trauma, you cannot know which case has become the impossible one until it does, and by then the level of attention you bring to the start of the case determines whether you are positioned to manage the turn. 4 years of Mara Voss's presence changed what possible looked like on the overnight trauma team at Brannick. I knew this. I did not know why. The wall marks are the beginning of the why. Chapter 2. I found the first set of marks in month 8 of Mara's time on the floor. We had come through a bad night. A multi-vehicle accident on the expressway in January, 2 critical patients. The specific compounding difficulty of 2 simultaneous critical cases in a trauma bay with a team that is very good, and that is still, in the parallel management of 2 cases of equal severity, stretched to its limit. We had come through it. Both patients had been stabilized and sent to the OR, with outcomes that were, by the standards of what they had arrived with, good. I was in Trauma Bay 2 doing the post-case reset. The specific routine of a trauma bay coming back to operational readiness after a critical case. The restocking and cleaning and documentation, that means the bay is ready for the next case, before the team has fully recovered from the last one. I was making notes at the bay station, and I looked up at the wall in the automatic, unfocused way of someone whose eyes need somewhere to rest that is not a screen. I saw the marks. I saw them because I was not looking for anything specific, and the eye, in that unfocused state, catches things that directed attention misses. I saw them and I looked at them, and I did not know immediately what I was seeing, which is to say I identified them as marks on the wall, without immediately identifying what kind of marks they were or how they had been produced. I walked to the wall. I looked at them closely. Parallel. Horizontal. Finger width. The paint slightly disturbed in the specific way that paint is disturbed when a hand has been pressed against it with some force and moved. 4 sets. Each set approximately 6 inches of wall. Each set spaced about 8 inches from the next. I looked at the marks. I looked at the wider scuff they were nested within. I thought, someone has been pressing their hands against this wall. I thought, that is a specific thing to do. I thought, the marks are fresh. The paint disturbance has the quality of something recent, rather than something long dried. I thought, I do not know when this happened or who did it or why. I went back to my notes. I did not ask. The second set of marks appeared 3 months after the first. Another bad night. A fall from height. A construction worker. 4 stories. The specific pattern of injuries that height and impact and the specific ways a human body negotiates the sudden end of a fall produce. He had survived. He had survived in a way that the trauma team had managed with the specific, organized intensity of a team that knows exactly what to do and has the capacity to do it. And that had come through a case that arrived as a question about whether the body on the table was going to make it and had departed as a case with a positive trajectory. I went to the bay afterward. I looked at the wall. 4 new sets of marks, nested within the old ones or beside them, the specific accumulation of a practice repeated. The paint around the new ones had the freshness that the first set had had. The older ones had faded slightly into the scuff. I stood at the wall for a while. Then I started keeping a record. Not a clinical record, a personal one. A small notebook that I kept in my locker, not because I expected the record to be evidence for anything or to require the formality of documentation, but because I am the kind of physician who keeps records of things he does not understand, because understanding has always started, for me, with the accumulation of data and the patterns that emerge from accumulation. I noted the date, the case, the outcome, and the state of the wall. 14 times in 3 years. I want to tell you about some of them. Uh, Entry 4. A 29-year-old woman, GSW to the abdomen, brought in by her husband who had found her at the bottom of the stairs. The mechanism was inconsistent with the injury pattern, and the inconsistency was not immediately apparent. The wound location was consistent with a fall. The specific angle of the wound was not. Mara caught the inconsistency during the secondary survey. She noted it to me quietly, not in front of the husband who was in the family room, not in front of anyone who did not need the information. She said, "The entry angle is inconsistent with a fall from the stairs she described. The entry angle is consistent with a close-range contact wound from approximately this height relative to the patient's position." She used her hand to demonstrate the angle. She was right. The police were called. The husband was detained. The woman survived, and in the months that followed accessed the support that survival makes possible. I documented the case. I noted the wall. I filed the observation under, "She is very good at her job." "She is very good at her job" was the heading under which I filed everything for 3 years. It was true and it was insufficient. Entry 7. A 44-year-old man, cardiac arrest following a diving accident in the harbor. He had been under for an estimated 7 minutes before his companion pulled him out. He had been in cardiac arrest for an estimated 3 minutes before the paramedics reached him. He arrived at Brannock in ventricular fibrillation with a core temperature that told me 2 things simultaneously: that the hypothermia was severe enough to be the primary management challenge, and that the same hypothermia that was the primary management challenge was also, potentially, the thing that had preserved his neurological function through the arrest. The aphorism in emergency medicine is, "You are not dead until you are warm and dead." The aphorism exists because cold cardiac arrests can survive resuscitation that warm cardiac arrests of equivalent duration cannot. The mechanism is the metabolic slowdown that hypothermia produces. The same mechanism that kills a person who is cold enough for long enough is also, in the specific window before it becomes fatal, the mechanism that preserves the organs that warmth would have let deteriorate. I know this. What I do not always know, what this case required knowing, is the specific rewarming sequence for a hypothermic cardiac arrest complicated by saltwater aspiration and the neurological complication of a prolonged submerged period. The interaction between these 3 elements produces a management problem of genuine complexity. Mara solved it, not loudly. She came to the base station where I was running the numbers on the rewarming curve, and she said, "The sequence you are running is going to overshoot the rewarming rate and produce a rewarming arrhythmia before you get the core temperature to the target." The sequence for saltwater aspiration combined with cardiac arrest needs a different rate. She told me what the different rate was. I used it. He survived, neurologically intact. I asked her afterward, "How do you know the saltwater interaction changes the rewarming rate?" She said, "I learned it from a case. I will tell you about it someday." She did not tell me that day. She told me on November 14th. Entry 11. A 14-year-old boy, penetrating head trauma from a nail gun accident at his father's construction site. The nail had entered the right temporal region at an angle that the imaging showed was within millimeters of the middle meningeal artery. It had not struck the artery. It was adjacent to it. The imaging was clear. The neurosurgery team was on their way. The management question, the specific, immediate management question, while we waited for neurosurgery, was whether the nail was stable enough to leave in place for the interval, or whether there was a risk of migration that required intervention before the surgeons arrived. This is not a question with a textbook answer. The textbook answer is, leave penetrating objects in situ and let the surgeons make the decision. The textbook answer is correct as a general principle. In this specific case, nail gun nail, temporal entry, middle meningeal adjacency, 14-year-old who was becoming increasingly agitated, which produced movement that produced the specific risk of migration, In a temporal nail, the textbook answer was correct and also potentially inadequate. Mara assessed the stability of the nail with her hands. Not invasively, she assessed it from the outside, with the specific, light touch of someone whose hands have been trained to read structural information through a surface. She said, "It is stable." She said this with the flat certainty of someone reporting a clinical observation rather than a hypothesis. She said, "He can wait for neurosurgery. Sedate him enough to reduce the agitation, but do not sedate him enough to suppress the neurological assessment." She was right. He was sedated. He waited. The neurosurgeons arrived. The nail was extracted without vascular complication. The boy was discharged 6 weeks later. His father sends a Christmas card to the trauma team every year. I know this because Brannick sends a holiday mailing to the families of significant cases, and the father's return address is on the list. I documented entry 11. I looked at the wall. I still did not ask. Chapter 3. I want to tell you who Mara Voss was on the overnight trauma team at Brannick, before I tell you who she was before Brannick. These are two different things and both of them are important. The person she was before is the explanation for the person she is now. But the person she is now is the person I worked alongside for 4 years and trusted with the worst cases, and who built the best trauma team I have been part of. The explanation matters. It does not supersede the thing being explained. She arrived on the team the way the best people arrive, already good, already present, already carrying the quality that the work requires before the work has had the chance to build it. The first night I worked alongside her, I noticed 3 things. The first, her situational awareness. In a trauma bay, situational awareness is the practitioner's ability to hold the full picture simultaneously, to manage the immediate clinical problem while maintaining awareness of the room, the team, the resources, the patient's trajectory, and the variables that might change any element of the picture at any moment. It is a skill that emergency and trauma medicine requires, and that develops over years of practice in high-stakes environments. Most practitioners develop it gradually. It is rare, in my experience, to encounter someone who arrives with it fully formed. Mara arrived with it fully formed. She walked into a bay with a multi-trauma patient for the first time on her second shift. I had been watching her on the first shift, a quieter night, to get a read on her baseline, and she managed the room the way someone manages a room they have been in 100 times before. Not confidently in the performed sense. Naturally, the specific naturalness of a skill that has been integrated so thoroughly that it no longer requires conscious execution. The second thing I noticed was her communication under pressure. The trauma bay at maximum load is an environment of concentrated noise. Multiple people speaking, monitors alarming, equipment sounds, the ambient intensity of a room in which the stakes are as high as they get. Communication in that environment is a skill separate from clinical knowledge, the ability to deliver information at the right volume, at the right moment, to the right person, in the specific compressed language that trauma communication uses, without the information being lost in the noise, or arriving with so much urgency that it creates panic rather than action. Mara communicated in that environment the way a person communicates in a quiet room. Not quietly, precisely. The specific quality of communication that requires less volume, because every word is correctly targeted and correctly timed, and therefore requires no repetition and no clarification. She spoke and people heard her the first time, every time, because what she said was exactly what needed to be said at exactly the moment it needed to be said. I noticed this in the first serious case we managed together, and I filed it, and I continued to notice it for 4 years, and I continued to file it, and the file grew very thick, and I continued not to ask about it. The third thing I noticed was the way she managed pain. I do not mean the pharmacological management of pain, though she was excellent at that. I mean the specific human management of pain, the thing a nurse does alongside the pharmacology that is not pharmacological, and that matters as much as the pharmacology, in the specific way that things matter in a trauma bay, when a person has been through something traumatic and their body and their mind are both running the specific post-event response that trauma produces. She sat with pain. That is the only way I know to describe it. She was present with patients who were in pain in a way that acknowledged the pain rather than managing it away. That said, "This is real. You are in it. I am here with you in it." And that produced in the patients she touched a specific, measurable calm that the pharmacology alone did not produce. I documented this observation. I did not ask about it. I filed it. By year 3 I had a very full file. There were things I noticed that were harder to file. Things that did not fit comfortably under. She is very good at her job, and that required a different category that I never formally created, but that existed as a separate space in the part of my professional attention where I kept the things I was not ready to examine. She knew things that a trauma nurse should not know, not in a dramatic sense, in the specific sense of the GSW wound angle that she read in entry 4, and the saltwater rewarming interaction in entry 7, and the nail stability assessment in entry 11. The specific, deep knowledge of someone who has been in situations that produce that knowledge, not clinical situations in the ordinary sense, but operational situations. The situations that teach you to read a wound from the outside, rather than the inside, because you do not have the equipment to read it from the inside. The situations that teach you rewarming protocols by working through their failure modes in the field, rather than by reading about their success cases in a textbook. She knew the way people know things from the inside. I knew enough about what the inside of those situations looked like, from years of treating the patients who had been in them, to recognize the knowledge that came from them. I did not ask. The other thing, the one that sits at the center of everything. She was comfortable with the possibility of death, not callous, the opposite of callous. She felt the weight of every patient, every case, every outcome. I could see this in the wall marks, in the specific quality of her face after the worst nights, in the way she managed the family conversations that followed difficult cases. She felt it all. But the possibility of a patient's death did not destabilize her the way it destabilizes most practitioners at some point in their career, because she had a relationship with that possibility that had been built in a context where the possibility was constant, and where the destabilization of a practitioner by the possibility produced outcomes that could not be undone. She had been somewhere where death was the ambient condition. She had learned to work in it. She had brought that learning to Brannick. I knew this. I never asked. Chapter 4. The overnight trauma team at Brannick is 8 people on a full rotation. Mara charges. That means she manages the floor, the assignments, the room logistics, the family communication, the coordination with the OR and the ICU, and the diagnostic services. She charges the way the best charge nurses charge, which is from the front rather than from the station. She is in the rooms, she is at the bedsides, she is in the bays when the serious cases come in. She charges from the position of someone who has never lost the reflex to be in the room where the work is. The rest of the team I want to describe briefly, because they matter to this story. Denny Okafor. 4 years on the overnight team, 3rd year after completing his trauma nursing specialty certification. He is 28 years old, and he is the nurse who improved the fastest of anyone I have watched develop on this team. Part of this is his own capability and work ethic, which are genuine. Part of it is proximity to Mara. I have watched people improve in proximity to her in the specific way that proximity to someone who is genuinely excellent at a thing improves the people around them, not through explicit teaching, though she teaches when asked, but through the osmotic process of watching excellence close up over a long period. Rita Shen, 7 years at Brannick, 3 on overnight trauma. She is the most technically precise member of the team. Her IV placements are the best I have seen from any nurse at any level of experience. Her documentation is immaculate. She has the specific quality of a person who has decided that the standard is the floor rather than the ceiling, and who maintains that position without fanfare or complaint through every shift regardless of what the shift requires. Carter Webb, 2 years on the team, the youngest member. He came from a pediatric background and made the move to adult trauma because he wanted the volume. He got the volume. He has handled it with the specific quality of someone who has not had time to develop the emotional armor that sometimes accompanies long experience in emergency medicine, and who therefore brings a rawness to the work that is both his most vulnerable characteristic and his most valuable one. These 3, plus 4 others on rotation, constitute the team that Mara built over 4 years, not by selecting them, because charge nurses at Brannick do not select their team, but by being the person they were building around. The team formed around her the way a structure forms around a load-bearing element. Everything else found its position relative to where she was. I am telling you about the team because what happened on November 14th happened to all of them, not just to me. To all of them. And the way it happened to each of them was different, because each of them knew her differently. But the center of what it happened to was the same for all of us. We had been trusting someone we had not fully known, and we had been right to trust her. And the rightness of the trust and the incompleteness of the knowing were both true at the same time, and holding both of those things simultaneously is the emotional work that all of us did in the weeks that followed November 14th. I want to tell you one more thing about the team before I get to that night. The team had a habit of gathering in the break room at the end of the hardest shifts. Not an official gathering, nobody called it that, nobody organized it. It was not on any schedule. It simply happened. After the nights that asked the most, the team would find its way to the break room. Not all at once, not immediately, but gradually, the way people find their way to the same place when they have been through the same thing, and the same thing requires the specific process of a group of people who have shared a difficult experience, sitting together, without necessarily talking about it directly. Mara was always there. She was not always the first person to arrive. Sometimes she was the last. But she was always there, and her presence had a specific quality that was different from the ordinary presence of a colleague in a break room. She had the quality of someone who understood why the gathering happened, who understood what it was for, and who participated in it with the same complete presence she brought to everything else. She never talked about herself in those gatherings. She asked about the others. She listened when they talked. She had the specific, genuine quality of a person who is interested in the people around them in a way that goes beyond professional courtesy, who wants to know who they are, not just how they performed. I noticed this. I should have asked about it sooner than I did. The asking, when it finally came from the wrong direction. It came from Captain Dana Holt, Naval Special Warfare, on the night of November 14th, in the form of a name that made everything I had been filing click into the shape it had been all along. Chapter 5. Brannick's ambulance bay faces west. In November in Boston, the west-facing ambulance bay receives the specific weather of a New England autumn that has made its decision about winter, the cold that has stopped being the cool of early fall, and has become the cold of something that intends to be what it is for a very long time. The bay doors are heated from below to prevent ice formation on the threshold, and the heated threshold produces a thin band of warmth at foot level that is surrounded on all other sides by the cold, which means stepping into the bay in November means stepping from the residual warmth of the hospital corridor into a specific, abrupt cold that the body registers before the mind has consciously registered the temperature change. I was at the bay entrance when the vehicles arrived, not waiting for them. I was between cases, standing where I sometimes stand between cases when the corridor is noisy, and I need 30 seconds of outdoor cold air to reset, which is a habit I developed in year 3 at Brannick, and that I have maintained because it works. The cold resets something. It does the work that brakes do not always do. The vehicles were 2 black SUVs moving at a speed that was not consistent with the speed limit on the approach road. I watched them come. They pulled into the ambulance bay with the specific authority of vehicles driven by people who have already made the decision about where they are going and who require no further navigation input. The lead vehicle stopped at the bay doors. The second stopped behind it. Men got out. The specific quality of the men who got out, the way they moved, the way they positioned themselves relative to each other and to the doors and to the patient they were lifting from the second vehicle, told me several things before any of them spoke. They were operators. They had been in bad conditions recently. They were managing something they had been managing for some time, and that was approaching the end of what they could manage. The patient was wrapped in a thermal blanket that had the specific appearance of a thermal blanket that has been doing a lot of work for a long time and is not warm anymore in the way a fresh thermal blanket is warm. Their commander reached me first. She was broad-shouldered, weathered, with the bearing of someone who has held authority in difficult places for a long time and who holds it so naturally that it has stopped requiring effort. She had a federal credential, and she had it in my hand before I had finished processing what I was looking at. She said, "Commander James Reeve, SEAL Team 2, 4 GSWs, 2 through and through, 2 retained, 1 in left chest. He was in the water. Harbor temperature. Estimated 40 minutes submersion. He has been field treated for 1 hour. The field treatment is at its limit," she said. "His name is James Reeve and he is 39 years old. And he is the best operator I have ever commanded, and I need you to keep him alive." She did not say please. People who have operated in the conditions she had operated in do not say please in moments like this one. Please is a word for situations where the outcome is uncertain. She had decided the outcome was not going to be uncertain. She was communicating the decision as a fact. I said, "Bay 1, move." The clinical picture when James Reeve was transferred to the bay table was exactly as complicated as the mechanism suggested it would be. The gunshot wounds were the visible problem. 2 through and throughs, 1 left lateral chest, 1 right upper quadrant, that had been field dressed with the specific professionalism of people who know how to dress a gunshot wound under operational conditions. The dressings had held. The 2 retained rounds were the imaging problem. One of them in a location that was going to require the thoracic surgeon, and one of them in a location that was going to require the vascular surgeon, and both of them in locations that were going to require discussion between the 2 surgeons about sequencing. The water was the invisible problem. When I say invisible, I mean not immediately visible in the presenting picture. The hypothermia was present in his core temperature, which was lower than it needed to be for normal cardiac function, by a margin that the monitor was communicating clearly. What was not immediately visible was the specific interaction between the hypothermic cardiac depression and the hemorrhagic shock from the gunshot wounds, the specific way in which the 2 competing physiological states were amplifying each other rather than being independent problems, because neither the hypothermia management nor the hemorrhagic shock management, applied in the standard way, was addressing the other, and each one, in being managed independently, was making the other harder to manage. I recognized this. I built my plan around it. My plan was correct for a standard hypothermic trauma presentation. It was not correct for this specific presentation. I did not know this yet. The team ran the case. The team was Mara, Denny, Rita, and Carter, plus my trauma resident Dr. Sarah Chen, who was in her 2nd year of residency, and who had been on the overnight rotation for 4 months, and who was, at this point in her training, competent and improving, and not yet at the level where I could delegate the most complex decisions to her. The presence of Captain Holt and 2 of her operators inside the bay was a variable I managed by positioning. I put them against the far wall, away from the table, where they had sightlines but were not in the workflow. Holt did not argue about the positioning. She moved to the wall and she stayed there, and she watched with the specific, focused attention of someone who is contributing to the outcome through the force of their attention, even though they are not contributing with their hands. I have seen this quality in the commanding officers of military patients before. It is the quality of someone who knows that the room belongs to the medical team right now, and who respects this completely, and who is simultaneously not able to not be in the room. We ran the hemorrhagic shock protocol. We ran the hypothermia protocol. We ran them simultaneously, which is the standard approach to a combined presentation. And the standard approach produced the standard problem with this specific presentation, which is that the rewarming and the volume resuscitation were working against each other in the specific way that they work against each other when the cardiac depression from the hypothermia is severe enough that the volume cannot be effectively circulated. Reeves' pressure was not responding. I reassessed. The reassessment told me the same thing the initial assessment had told me. Both protocols were correct for their individual targets. Combined effect was inadequate. I was looking at the monitor when Mara came to the bay door. Chapter 6. She did not come in immediately. This is the thing I want to describe accurately, because it is the thing that tells you who she is. She stood at the bay door threshold for a moment, not hesitating, assessing. She was reading the room in the specific, comprehensive way she read all rooms before she entered them. The monitor readings, the patient, the team's positions, my position, the state of the interventions currently running. She was taking the full picture, and before she added herself to it. 60 seconds. Then she came in. She came to where I was standing. She said quietly enough that the operators against the wall could not hear her over the ambient noise of the bay, which I understood was intentional, frank. The competing protocol problem. Yes, I said. The hypothermia is severe enough that the cardiac output cannot distribute the volume you are running. The volume is pooling peripherally. It is not reaching the core. You are producing fluid overload in the extremities while the core remains volume depleted. I looked at the monitor. She was describing exactly what I was seeing and had not yet fully named. The standard rewarming sequence is too slow for this presentation, she said. The cardiac depression is severe enough that you need the core temperature up before the hemorrhagic management can work. You need to temporarily suspend the volume resuscitation, run an accelerated rewarming sequence to bring the core temperature up to the threshold where the cardiac output can distribute volume, and then resume volume resuscitation at that point. I said, temporarily suspending volume resuscitation in a patient with hemorrhagic shock is the intervention that the competing protocol requires, she said. I know what I am asking you to authorize. I know the risk. The alternative is that both protocols continue to counteract each other until neither one is making any difference. The window for the accelerated rewarming sequence to work is closing. I need you to listen to me. I looked at James Reeve on the table. His pressure had dropped another 6 points while we had been speaking. I looked at Mara. She looked back at me with the green eyes that I had been reading for 4 years. The eyes that were, I understood in this moment, the eyes of someone who has been in this exact situation before, who has looked at a patient with this exact presentation, and has made this exact intervention, and has watched it work. Who is not describing a theory, who is describing a memory. Walk me through the sequence, I said. She walked me through it. The sequence was specific, technical, and outside the standard protocol, in ways that were not random deviations but purposeful ones, each step of a deviation serving a specific physiological function in the management of the specific competing state that James Reeve's body was producing. It was the sequence of someone who had learned it by working through its failure modes and its success modes and conditions that the standard protocol had not been designed for. I ran the sequence. I am going to tell you what the sequence did, in clinical terms, because the clinical terms are the terms in which what Mara did was extraordinary, and the clinical terms deserve to be on the record. The accelerated rewarming, achieved through a combination of active internal rewarming via heated humidified oxygen, and a modified external rewarming approach that concentrated heat delivery on the core, rather than the periphery, brought James Reeve's core temperature up 3 degrees Celsius over the following period. The rate was faster than the standard protocol, because the standard protocol is designed for moderate hypothermia, and he was past moderate. The faster rate carried a risk of rewarming arrhythmia that the sequence Mara described managed through a specific medication protocol running alongside the rewarming. At the threshold temperature she specified, I resumed volume resuscitation. The volume distributed. The pressure began to respond. Not immediately. Not in the space of seconds. Over the following period, the slow, incremental improvement of a body that has been given the correct intervention and is using it, the pressure climbed to a level that was low, but was directionally right, and continued climbing. The cardiac monitor showed the rhythm stabilizing, the rate normalizing. The specific organized electrical activity of a heart that is no longer fighting two simultaneous physiological crises, and has been given the sequence that addresses the interaction between them rather than addressing them independently. Sarah Chen, my resident, came to stand beside me. She said, "His pressure is 60/40. Keep watching," I said. 65/42. It's climbing, Dr. Reilly. I know. What did you change? I looked at Mara. She was at the bedside. She had moved to the bedside while I was watching the monitor, not with any announcement or request for access, simply because the bedside was where she needed to be. Her hands were at Reeves' wrist. The pulse check, the oldest vital sign, the one that predates monitoring equipment by centuries, and that experienced practitioners still perform, because the hands tell you something the monitor does not. She looked up from the wrist. She looked at me. She nodded. 70/48, Sarah said. 75/50. It is climbing consistently. He needs the surgeons, Mara said. The retained rounds. He is stable enough to go now. He will hold through the procedure. She said it with the flat certainty of someone reporting a fact. She was right, he held. Chapter 7. I found Captain Dana Holt in the corridor outside the surgical suite. She had moved from the trauma bay to the corridor outside the surgical suite when Reeve went to the OR, which told me that she understood the transition of care and was managing the waiting with the same operational precision she brought to everything else. She had taken up a position that gave her a sight line to the OR doors, placed herself where she needed to be, and was waiting. Her two operators were with her. They had taken flanking positions in the corridor with the automatic spatial awareness of people who default to tactically sound positioning in any environment. The three of them together in the hospital corridor had the quality of something that had been deployed into an environment it was not designed for, and that was adapting with complete competence regardless. I told her he was in surgery. I told her the presenting picture had been complex, and that the complexity had been managed, and that his vital signs, when he entered the OR, had been better than they were going to be without the specific intervention that had been identified and applied. She received this with the quality of someone who has spent a career receiving operational briefings, taking in the information completely without visible processing, integrating it, and then acting. She said, "The intervention. The rewarming sequence. Yes. That is not in the standard protocol, no." Who identified it? My charge nurse. She looked at me, she said, "What is her name?" I told her. The corridor was very quiet. Holt looked at the OR doors. She said, "That is not a name I can hear without more context. I need you to understand what I am telling you. The name you just said belongs to a woman who was a Special Amphibious Reconnaissance Corpsman with Naval Special Warfare Group 2. She was the first and only woman to complete the SARC pipeline in the program's history. She was declared killed in action in the South China Sea in an operation I cannot describe to you. She has been listed as KIA for 3 years. I looked at her. She said, "I gave the notification to her family. I sat in their living room in Portland, Oregon, and I delivered the notification myself, because she was my corpsman and she deserved a commanding officer at the door and not a stranger. I sat in their living room, and her mother held my hand while I told her. Her jaw was tight. "And you are telling me," she said, "that your charge nurse's name is Mara Voss." I said, "Describe her." I described her. The auburn hair, the green eyes, the quality of stillness, the way she moved in the worst rooms. Holt closed her eyes for a moment, then she opened them. She said, I need to see her. I said, I am going to find her first. She looked at me. She said, she does not know I am here. She does not know Reeve is the patient. I said, I am going to find her first anyway. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she said, fair. Go. Chapter ET. I went to Trauma Bay 2 first. I do not know exactly why I went to Trauma Bay 2 before I went to find Mara. I know what I was doing when I went there. I was confirming something. I was going to the wall before I went to the person, because the wall was where the evidence was, and I am a physician who goes to the evidence before he goes to the person, not because the person matters less, but because the evidence is the framework within which the person makes sense. The bay was in post-case reset, the team working through the standard restoration of operational readiness, restocking and cleaning and documenting. Denny was at the supply cart. Rita was at the documentation station. Carter was breaking down the IV setup from the case. I went to the wall. The marks were fresh, not just the marks from tonight. All of them were visible. The 14 from before faded into the scuff at various degrees of age, and the newest set fresh, the paint slightly disturbed in the way that fresh marks disturb it. 15 sets total. 14 old cases and 1 from tonight. I put my hand on the wall beside the marks, not touching them, beside them. My hand on the wall beside the marks that someone had made on the worst nights for 4 years, on the nights when the cases were impossible, and they were not impossible in the end. Dr. Reilly? Carter. He was looking at me from across the bay with the specific expression of a young nurse who has found his attending standing with his hand on a wall in a post-case bay and is not sure what the appropriate response to this is. Fine, I said. Go ahead with the reset. He went ahead with the reset. I took my hand off the wall. I went to find Mara. She was in the supply corridor. The supply corridor at Brannick is a narrow service hallway that runs behind the trauma bays. It provides access to the supply storage rooms and the equipment maintenance areas and the loading dock and various other functional spaces that the operational side of the department requires. It is not a place where staff typically spend time outside of supply runs. It is utilitarian, concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, the specific ambient temperature of a space that is neither heated to human comfort nor cold enough to require active management. She was standing with her back against the concrete wall, her hands flat against the surface behind her, her fingers pressed into the concrete in the specific way I had been watching her make marks on the bay wall for 3 years. Her eyes were closed. She was pressing into the wall with the deliberate, grounding quality of someone who is using the physical contact to manage something that would otherwise be unmanageable, not distress, exactly. The specific post-event processing of someone who has just been through something significant and who knows how to bring themselves back from it and is in the middle of doing so. I stood in the doorway. I did not speak. She opened her eyes. She looked at me with the green eyes that I had been reading for 4 years and that I understood now I had only been reading the surface of. She said, Captain Holt is in the building. Yes, I said. She identified the patient. She identified you, I said. From the name. Mara was quiet for a moment. Her hands were still flat against the concrete. She said, he's going to be all right. Yes, I said. He is going to be all right. She closed her eyes again for a moment. The specific, involuntary closing of the eyes of someone receiving confirmation of something they had needed to be confirmed. Then she opened them. She said, I will tell you everything. Sit down. There was nowhere to sit in the supply corridor, so I leaned against the opposite wall, which is not sitting but served the purpose of taking my weight off my feet and establishing the posture of someone who is not in a hurry and is prepared to receive what is coming. She took her hands off the concrete. She turned to face me. She said, my name is Mara Voss. That is real. It is the name I was given and the name I have always used. Everything on my nursing license is real. Everything on my hospital employment record is real. I am a nurse. I have been a nurse for 13 years. That is all true. She looked at me. Before nursing, she said, I was a SARS. Chapter 9. I want to take a moment to explain what SARC means, because it is not a word that appears in the ordinary vocabulary of civilian medicine, and its meaning is relevant to everything that follows. SARC stands for Special Amphibious Reconnaissance Corpsman. A SARC is a United States Navy hospital corpsman who has completed, in addition to the standard corpsman training pipeline, the Basic Reconnaissance Course, Force Reconnaissance Training, and Combatant Dive Course certifications. The pipeline is one of the longest and most demanding in the special operations community. It produces a practitioner who is simultaneously a medical professional and an operator, someone who is capable of providing advanced trauma care in combat conditions while also being capable of the direct action, reconnaissance, and maritime operations that force reconnaissance and naval special warfare require. The SARC pipeline has been open to women since 2017. As of the time of November 14th, one woman had completed it, Mara Voss. She told me this in the supply corridor with the specific economy of someone who does not narrate their accomplishments, but who, when asked to provide context, provides it completely and accurately. She said, "The pipeline took 22 months. The attrition rate for the cohort I entered was 83%. I was the only person in my cohort who completed the combatant dive course on the first attempt. I spent 6 years operational after completion, 3 deployments. The South China Sea was the third." She said all of this in the same flat, functional tone she used to describe clinical presentations. Facts. Delivered as facts, without the performance of either pride or modesty. I said, "The rewarming sequence. Second deployment," she said. Maritime recovery of a casualty who had been in the water in similar conditions to tonight. The standard protocol failed in the same way for the same reasons. I worked through the failure. I identified the competing protocol interaction. I developed the sequence that tonight required. She paused. It cost me the patient. I got the sequence right on the next one. She said it simply. I sat with it. How many? I said. Patients from whom I learned something significant enough to apply here? Yes. She considered. Most of them, she said. Everything I know about penetrating wound assessment from outside I learned in the field. The saltwater aspiration interaction I learned from the maritime recovery case. The nail stability assessment I learned from a case involving a fragmentation injury where the fragment was in a comparable anatomical position. The wound angle in the GSW case from the stairs. She stopped. She looked at me. You noticed that. Entry 4, I said. She was quiet for a moment. You have been keeping records, she said. I have been keeping records, I confirmed, of the wall, among other things. She looked at the wall of the supply corridor, at her own hands against the concrete, the same gesture on a different surface. She said, I learned the wall from a psych rotation in my nursing training. It was a recommendation for managing acute stress response, grounding through physical contact with a surface, the concrete, the paint. You feel the texture and you press into it, and the physical sensation gives the nervous system something to process that is not the thing it has just been through. She paused. It works better than the alternatives I have used. I did not ask what the alternatives were. I was not sure I needed to. She told me about the South China Sea. She told it in the specific compressed way of someone who has given operational debriefs before, and who understands that the relevant information is the information that explains the outcome, and that the surrounding context is provided only insofar as it makes the outcome legible. The operation had been a maritime reconnaissance, the specific type of mission that SARC operators are uniquely qualified for, combining underwater approach, surface reconnaissance, and the capacity for medical support if the reconnaissance contact went wrong. It had gone wrong. Not in a way that was anyone's fault. In the way that operations go wrong when the intelligence picture has gaps that the intelligence picture does not know about until the gaps produce contact. She had been in the water when the contact happened. She had reached the casualty, one of the operators, hit during the extraction phase, and she had managed him in the water, in the dark, in a sea state that was not compatible with the kind of medical management the casualty required, and she had gotten him to the extraction point and onto the vehicle, and she had managed him through the transit to the forward operating facility, and he had survived. The KIA listing, I said. I missed the extraction window, she said. By the time the casualty was stable enough to move, the primary extraction was gone. There was a secondary extraction, but it was not at my position. I managed the casualty to the secondary extraction point. The transit took time. By the time the report was filed, I was past the window for the primary listing, and the secondary listing requires a different process. She paused. The KIA listing was the administrative outcome of the gap between my last confirmed position and the completion of the extraction. It was the correct administrative outcome for what the information available at the time indicated. But you were alive. I was alive, she confirmed. With a casualty who was alive because of the decisions I made after the window closed, which was the outcome the operation required and which I do not regret. I looked at her. She looked back, I said. When you came back. When the listing was resolved, she said. When the after action produced the corrected record, I had a decision to make about where to go and what to do. I had been a nurse before the SARC pipeline. I had worked trauma. I came back to trauma because the work in the field had shown me what the work in the field requires, and what it requires is what the work here requires. And I wanted to be in the place where I could do the most with what I had learned. Boss said. She said. Specifically. Level 1 trauma, overnight rotation, high volume, the cases that the other centers route here, because the other centers have decided they are too complex. The cases where what I learned in the field is most applicable. She paused. I did not come here to hide. I came here to work. The name Mara Voss is my name. The record at Brannick is my record. I have not performed anything under a false identity. The operational background, I said. The SARC qualification, the deployments, are not on my nursing resume, she said. Correctly, they are classified. The knowledge they produced is not classified. The knowledge was always mine to use. I sat with this for a moment. Then I said, Captain Holt is waiting. I know, she said. She took her hands off the wall. She squared her shoulders in the small, precise way of someone preparing for something they have been preparing for a long time. She said, Bring her. Chen. I brought Holt to the supply corridor. She came with me without asking where we were going. She had the quality of someone who trusts the person in front of them to be bringing them to the right place, which is a quality built over years of operating in environments where you have to trust the person in front of you to be doing the right thing or the environments will kill you. She came into the supply corridor. She stopped. Mara was standing in the middle of the corridor, straight, her hands at her sides, her face carrying the expression that I had been watching for 4 years, and that I could now read fully. She was present. Completely, undivided, entirely present. Not performing the presence, living it. Holt looked at her for a long time. She said, Voss, Mara said. Captain Holt, I sat in your mother's living room, Holt said. Her voice was level in the way that very well-controlled voices are level under very significant pressure. I held her hand. I know, Mara said. She told me. You have spoken to her. As soon as the listing was corrected and the record permitted it, she said. She knows I am alive. She has known for some time. The family was notified through the appropriate channels. Holt her eyes for a moment. The moment lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then she opened them. She said, Reeve. He is going to be all right, Mara said. The sequence worked. He will need the retained round management and recovery time, but the systemic picture is stable. How did you know the sequence? Second deployment. Maritime recovery case. I learned it the wrong way first. I have used the right way twice since then. Holt was quiet for a moment. Reeve, she said again. He was in your cohort. SARC pipeline. He was 3 classes ahead of you. He was an instructor for part of your combatant dive course. Something moved in Mara's face. Something small and specific. The specific micro-movement of someone receiving information that lands differently from information that is merely significant, landing in a register below the professional one. She said, I did not know the patient until you said his name in the bay. And when you heard it, I knew the sequence would work because I knew his physiological profile, she said. From the pipeline, from training together, I knew his cold water response characteristics. I knew the dive course data on his hypothermia threshold. The sequence I described was calibrated to his specific profile. Holt looked at her for a long time. She said, "You ran a personalized rewarming protocol based on dive course training data from 8 years ago." "Yes. In a civilian trauma bay, yes. And it worked," Mara said. "It worked because the data was correct and the application was correct, and he is built the way he is built." A pause. "And because he is the kind of person who does not stop fighting when the fighting becomes difficult. That is not the protocol. That is him." Holt looked at her. She said, "You stayed in the water for 4 hours after the window closed. The casualty required it." "The casualty required 45 minutes of management at most," Holt said. "The other 3 hours and 15 minutes were the transit to the secondary extraction point. That transit was survivable for the casualty without your continuous presence." Mara did not say anything. "You did not leave him," Holt said. "Even after he was stable. You did not leave him alone in the water in the dark." Mara said, "Why?" The supply corridor was very quiet. Mara said, "'Cause he was afraid. He was stable and he was afraid, and he had been alone in the water in the dark before I reached him, and I was not going to put him back in that alone." Holt looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "I need to make some calls." "I know," Mara said. "The listing correction has been filed. The record is accurate. But Reeve is going to require a debrief about tonight and about the protocol and about how you knew his profile. And that debrief is going to involve people above my authority. I understand. Will you still be here in the morning?" Mara looked at me. I said, "She will still be here." Mara looked at Holt. She said, "I will still be here." Chapter 11. Break room gathered itself after Holt left. Not immediately. It took the natural time it always took, the uncoordinated arrival of people who have been through something, and who find themselves in the break room, without having planned to find themselves there, drawn by the same magnetic quality that the worst nights have always produced in a team that has worked together long enough to understanding is for. Carter arrived first, then Rita, then Denny. I was already there. I had been there since Holt left, sitting at the table with a coffee that I had poured from the overnight pot, and that was not good coffee, but that was coffee, which what the situation required. Mara came in last. She came in the way she always came in on these nights, not hurrying, not delaying, with the quality of someone who knows the gathering is there and is arriving at it with full intention. She sat down, she looked at the team looked at her. Carter said, "The rewarming sequence." "I have never seen that sequence before." Mara said, "It is not in the standard curriculum." "Where does it come from?" She looked at Carter with the specific attention she gave everything, full, direct, unhurried. She said, "From a mistake I made. And then from not making the same mistake again." Carter absorbed this. Rita said, "The SEAL team, Holt. She knew your name." "Yes," Mara said. "She knew it in a specific way, yes." Rita looked at her. She said, "You do not have to tell us anything you do not want to tell us." "I know," Mara said. "I am going to tell you anyway. Because you've worked alongside me for years, and you have trusted me, and you are entitled to know who you have trusted." She told them. Not everything. The classified elements remained classified, and she was precise about what she could say and what she could not. But the shape of it, the SARC pipeline, the deployments, the South China Sea, the specific knowledge that those experiences had produced and that she had brought to Brannick and applied in the ways I had been cataloging for 3 years without asking about. The team listened. Denny said when she had finished, Entry 4. "The GSW from the stairs. The wound angle." "Yes," Mara said. "You called that in 30 seconds. I have seen penetrating wounds. The angles become legible when you have seen enough of them. She survived because you called it. She survived because the team managed her correctly and because the police arrived in time." Mara said, "I called it. The team did the work." Denny shook his head slightly, not in disagreement. in the specific gesture of someone receiving something that is too large for an immediate response and that requires the head to move slightly to make room for it. Carter said, "The wall." The room was quiet for a moment. He said, "I have seen the marks. I noticed them a while ago." I did not know what they were. Mara looked at him. She said, "I am sorry if they were alarming." "Not alarming," he said, confusing. "I did not know what I was looking at." "It is a grounding technique," she said. "Physical contact with a surface after a significant stress event. It helps regulate the nervous system. I use it because the alternatives I have used at various points in my career were more damaging." She said this without drama. Carter looked at her. He said, "Can I ask what the alternatives were?" She said, "Nothing you need to worry about. They are a long time ago." He nodded. The break room was quiet in the specific way it was quiet on the worst nights when the team had gathered. The quiet of people who have been through something together and who are in the specific process of integrating what they have been through. Rita said, quietly, "You came back here. To trauma. After everything." "Yes," Mara said. "Why here? Why Brannick?" Mara looked at the table. She said, "Because the work at Brannick is the work that requires what I have. Not all of it. Most settings do not require most of what I have. But Brannick does. The volume, the complexity, the specific overnight challenge of a level 1 trauma center that serves the most demanding catchment in New England. This floor asks for everything I am capable of giving. That is why I came here and why I stayed." She looked around at the team. "And because of the people," she said. "Because the people here are the people who chose this floor, who chose the hardest rotation, the most demanding cases, the hours that other staff do not want. You all chose this. The same reason I came back to trauma nursing after 6 years of operational medicine is the reason you are all here. We are the same kind of people." Denny said, "Except you can open a chest in a bay and think nothing of it." A small silence. Then Mara almost smiled. The smile I had been watching for 4 years, the quiet one, the private one. The smile that appeared after the hardest nights when the team was in the break room and the worst of it had passed, and there was something on the other side of it that was not quite humor, and was not quite relief, and was the specific compound of the two that people who work the hardest jobs develop as their own private language. "I can open a chest in a bay," she said. "I prefer not to have to. I prefer it when the intervention that is required is the one where the chest stays closed." Carter laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes after a long night. The kind that is not funny in the ordinary sense, but that is the specific release of something that has been held for hours and has found the moment to let go. The break room filled with the sound of it. Mara sat in the middle of it with her hands around her coffee cup, and the quiet smile on her face, and the green eyes that were, I understood now, the eyes of someone who has been in every kind of room and who has chosen, after all of them, to be in this one. Chapter 12. James Reeve was in the OR for 6 hours. The thoracic surgery managed the retained round in the left chest. The vascular surgery managed the retained round in the right upper quadrant. The two surgical teams worked in sequence, the sequencing itself a management decision by the attending surgeons that took into account the specific physiological picture that Reeve presented with, which was, by the time he entered the OR, significantly better than the picture he had arrived with, which was itself the direct result of the competing protocol resolution that Mara had identified and I had executed. When the surgical team wheeled him to the ICU, his vitals were the vitals of a man who has been through an enormous amount, and whose body is performing the specific work of someone who has decided to survive it. The debrief that Holt had mentioned, the debrief involving people above her authority, happened over the following week. I was part of it for 1 session. Mara was part of it for 3. The sessions were conducted by people who identified themselves as being from offices that I was not given the full names of, in the conference room on the administrative floor that the hospital makes available for federal use when federal use is required. I was told, in the session I attended, what I needed to know. The Brannick Trauma Bay case was going to be documented as a standard trauma management case. The specific protocol deviation that had saved James Reeves' life was going to be documented as attending directed based on real-time clinical assessment. The operational context that had produced Mara's knowledge of the protocol was not going to be part of the hospital record. The hospital record was going to be accurate for all clinical purposes. The operational context was going to remain in the operational record where it belonged. I was told this was the appropriate handling. I agreed that it was. I signed the form that acknowledged my understanding of the handling. I went back to work. Reeve was in the Brannock ICU for 8 days before he was transferred to a military medical facility for the continuation of his recovery. On the 6th day, he was well enough to have visitors. On the 7th day, he asked for Mara. I know this because the ICU charge nurse, a woman named Bev, who has managed the overnight ICU at Brannock for 12 years, and who is, in my professional assessment, one of the 10 best nurses in the state of Massachusetts, paged me to let me know that the patient in the secured room had a specific request, and that she was not sure whether the request was one she should accommodate without checking with the attending. I told her to accommodate it. Mara went to the ICU on her off hours. She went alone. I do not know what was said in that room between the two of them, and I do not know what James Reeve looked like when he looked at the woman who had kept him in the water for 4 hours after the extraction window closed, who had built a protocol from his dive course data and applied it in a civilian trauma bay, who had been carrying the knowledge of him through 3 years of overnight trauma nursing in Boston. I do not know because I was not there and because it was not mine to witness. What I know is what Mara looked like when she came back to the trauma floor. She came back to the trauma floor the way she came back from everything, directly, quietly, with the quality of someone who has just been through something significant and who has integrated it in the specific way she integrates significant things, which is completely and without residue. She went to the nurse's station. She sat down. She picked up the next chart. She went to work. Chapter 13. The marks on the wall of Trauma Bay 2 have continued, new sets. Fewer than before. I do not know whether this is because the cases have been less demanding, because she has found other ways to manage the aftermath of the demanding ones, or because she knows I see them now and is doing something different. I have not asked. I have also not repainted the wall. This is a decision I made without fully articulating it to myself at the time I made it, and that I have since thought about enough to understand. I have not repainted the wall because the marks on the wall are a record. They are the record of 14 cases, 15 now, that came through this trauma bay on nights when the standard options were not going to be enough and something more than the standard options arrived and made them enough. The marks are not a clinical record. They are not evidence of anything a clinical record requires evidence of. They are the physical artifact of a person who has been in worse places than this trauma bay, and who has learned what surviving worse places requires, and who has brought that learning here and pressed it into the wall of the worst room in the building with the palms of her hands on the nights when the worst room needed everything it could get. I leave them there. The wall needs repainting anyway. It can wait until the scuff is gone. The scuff is not going anywhere. I want to tell you about a specific night that happened 4 months after November 14th, a night that was not an impossible case. A routine night, a broken arm, a laceration that needed suturing, a chest pain that turned out to be musculoskeletal, the ordinary catalog of a trauma bay that is between the significant events. We were in the break room at the end of it. All of us, Mara, Denny, Carter, Sarah Chera Chen, who had been assigned to the overnight rotation for a longer stretch and who was, by this point, beginning to have the look of someone who had found the floor they were going to stay on for the rest of their career. Carter said, at some point in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely, I told my sister about you. He was looking at Mara. She said, what did you tell her? He said, I told her I work with the best nurse I have ever seen. I told her that the best nurse I have ever seen was also a special operations corpsman. I told her that the combination of those two things means that when I am on the worst nights, and the worst case comes through the bay doors, I am not afraid. I am very many things. I am not afraid. The break room was quiet. Mara looked at Carter. She said, "You should be afraid." He looked at her. "Fear is information," she said. "Fear is the body telling you that the situation is serious, and that it requires full attention and full capacity. The people who perform best in the worst situations are not the people who have eliminated the fear. They are the people who have learned to use it, to let it sharpen them rather than paralyze them." She paused. "If you are not afraid when the worst case comes through the bay doors, you have lost something you need. Be afraid. Use it." Carter absorbed this. He said, "Is that what you do?" She said, "Always." He said, "Then how come you never look afraid?" She looked at him for a moment with the green eyes that contained all of it: the pipeline, the water, the South China Sea, the supply corridor, the wall marks, the 14 impossible cases and the 15th and whatever the subsequent ones would be. She said, "Because I have been using fear for long enough that the using of it looks like something else. But it is fear. Every time." Carter nodded. He did not say anything else. Nobody said anything else. The break room was the break room. The bad coffee and the fluorescent lights, and the specific quality of exhaustion and relief, and the compound of the two that this team had been building in this room for years. The specific break room culture of a team that has been through enough together that the room does not require performance from any of them. Mara sat in the middle of it with her hands around her cup. The same hands that had pressed into the concrete of the supply corridor wall. The same hands that had pressed into the paint of Trauma Bay 2 on 14 nights when the cases were impossible. The same hands that had managed casualties in the water in the South China Sea in the dark. The same hands that were, right now, around a coffee cup in a break room in Boston at the end of an unremarkable night. Both things true. Both of them hers. Chapter 14. I still work the overnight trauma team at Brannick Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts. 11 years has become 13. The Trauma Bay runs. The city feeds it what the city feeds it. We manage it. Mara still charges the overnight team. She is still the best charge nurse I have worked with. The comparison set is now 13 years deep, and she is still at the top of it by the same margin. The margin has not closed, because the margin was never about experience level. The margin was always about what she brought to the work that cannot be accumulated through ordinary experience. It was about the inside of the situations that produced her specific knowledge and her specific quality, and that made her, in a trauma bay in Boston, the person who knew what the wall of the worst room in the building needed to feel on the nights when the worst room needed everything it could get. I know now what the wall marks mean. They mean she was there. They mean she stayed. They mean that after the case was over, and the team was resetting, and the documentation was being completed, and the bay was coming back to operational readiness, she found the wall and she pressed into it the way she learned to press into things, into the wall, into the concrete, into the cold water, into whatever surface was available to press into, when the alternative was letting the thing she had just been through stay only in the inside of her. The wall holds the marks the way walls hold things. The wall does not care what it holds. It is a wall. It holds the marks, and it holds the scuff, and it holds the 20 years of gurney clips, and it holds the record of everything that has happened to Trauma Bay, too, since the building was built. The wall is indifferent to the significance of what it holds. I am not. I have kept my notebook. Not for 3 years now, for 4, 15 entries. Every entry with the case, the outcome, the state of the wall. All 15 cases with positive outcomes. I know now that this is not magic. I know it was never magic. It was a person who had been somewhere that taught her what survival requires, and who brought what survival requires to a room that needed it. The outcomes of the 15 cases are not explained by the wall marks. They are explained by the person who left the wall marks, by what she knew, and what she could do, and what she brought into the bay on the nights when the bay needed someone who had been somewhere worse. She had been somewhere worse. She came back from it. She brought it with her in the way that people bring the worst things they have survived, not as damage, though damage was part of it, but as the specific capability that surviving the worst thing produces in the people for whom surviving is not just an outcome but a practice, who have made the surviving into a skill, who can do it again and bring the skill to a room that needs it 14 times, and then 15, and counting. There is one more thing I want to tell you. 3 months after November 14th, a letter arrived at the Brannock Trauma Department addressed to the overnight trauma nursing team, not to an individual, to the team as a unit. It had been sent through channels that suggested whoever sent it had access to postal routing that the general public does not, which suggested the sender was someone for whom that kind of routing was available. The letter was handwritten. It said, "I understand you are not cleared to know the details of the case that came through your department in November. I understand the official record does not reflect the specifics of the intervention that saved my life. I want to tell you, as the person whose life was saved, that the intervention was extraordinary, that the knowledge required to identify it was knowledge that was built in conditions that I am also not able to describe to you, but that I know because I was trained in similar conditions. That the person who identified it and the physician who implemented it performed, together, the most precisely targeted piece of critical care management I have been the patient of in a career that has produced several opportunities to be a patient." He had written, "I do not know how to thank people who do what you do. I know how to thank operators. I know how to thank the people who deploy and return. I do not always know how to thank the people who stay, who choose the floor, and come back to it every night and hold the line in the specific way that the overnight trauma team at a level 1 center holds the line. The line you hold is as important as any line I have held." He had written, "Thank you for the line you hold." He had signed it with initials only. Jr. I read the letter at the nurse's station. I gave it to Mara. She read it standing at the station. She was quiet for a moment after she finished it. Then she folded it once, carefully, and put it in her scrub pocket. She picked up the next chart. She went to work. I watched her go. The wall of Trauma Bay 2 was visible through the bay glass from where I was standing. The long scuff, the marks inside it. 15 sets, the most recent still relatively fresh, the older ones settling into the scuff the way things settle into surfaces that hold them long enough. I looked at the wall. I looked at Mara. I thought, I should have asked sooner. I thought, I am glad I work here. I thought, the wall needs repainting and I am never going to repaint it. I went back to work. The overnight trauma team at Brannock Medical Center continued its night. The city continued to feed us what the city feeds us. We continued to manage it. That is the whole of it. That is everything. If you love this type of intense nurse-taking action tales, hit that like button. Share the video with your fellow thrill seekers, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a new story.